So two goldfish are in a tank. One goldfish turns to the other one and says, "Hey, how do we drive this thing?" So here we are back again. We are on video number 6, chapter 3. As always, just my completely horrendous, awful joke. So again, you guys got some jokes that you want added in here, let me know. Give you a shout out just like last time. So today we're going to talk about the end of the Civil War, the kind of final battle, the events leading up to it, and then unfortunately also the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So last time we ended by talking about how it's pretty much going to be a fight of Grant versus Lee, and Lee and the Confederates, they are on the run. Grant is chasing them. They're tired. They're worn out. They're battered. They're beaten. They really don't want to be in the war as much anymore. So they're just on the run. They're trying to get into the Confederacy and try to have that home field advantage. Now, while Grant is chasing Lee, Grant is going to put his most trusted subordinate, William Tecumseh Sherman, in charge of the fight in the West. And William Sherman, his goal is to head into the South, head into areas where the war really hadn't been fought too much. And that mostly is going to be in the deep South. And he is going to completely destroy and decimate anything that he comes across. And eventually he does get to Georgia. And when he gets to Georgia, his main goal, he wants to capture Atlanta. And he does so, and it's not that difficult for him, especially because at this time in the South, and especially that area, where they hadn't had much fighting and they're kind of worn out and don't really want to be there anymore, he captures it and he starts it on fire. And again, this war is a little bit different, where we have newer technology, newer weapons, and things of fighting are just going to be completely different. But he goes and he starts almost the entire city on fire. At one point, 1/3 of the city is lit up in flames. But he does that because he wants to show the people how scary this war is, what the war is actually like, instead of hearing it from different commanders or generals of people who really aren't going to be too involved in it. So anyways, once he does that, he is going to continue his march to the sea, which is what it is most infamously going to be known as. And this, again, he is going to destroy fields, factories, different mills, different textiles. Basically, anything that he comes across, it is going to be destroyed. Now, if you think about it, and if you were in that situation, and you're in an area where you know the war's going on, but it's never actually hit your homeland, and here comes William Sherman starting your house on fire, starting the entire village on fire, and unfortunately there were casualties, but he did try to make sure everybody was out. But this march to the sea is going to make a lot of people in the Deep South regret that they ever were involved into the Civil War. And then once he does eventually get to the coast, he heads north. And he is going to head north into South Carolina. The reason he wants to go to South Carolina, again, there hasn't been much fighting, and a lot of people look at South Carolina as the reason that the war was started, because they were the first to secede. Now eventually we get to the last battle. Before we get to the last battle of Appomattox Courthouse, though, it's important to talk about politics in the North. Now, Abraham Lincoln, he runs for a second term, and he does win. He is successful. And he sees his win as like a mandate to end slavery. Again, the Emancipation Proclamation started to help out with that, but it was only going to be freeing slaves in the South. Now he thinks that there needs to be a constitutional amendment in the North, constitutional amendment for the United States to completely get rid of slavery. So in 1865, we get to the 13th Amendment. And I'm not going to make you memorize all the amendments. It's important to know some of the major ones. But the 13th Amendment, all we need to know is that is what officially bans and officially outlaws slavery. Now, as General Lee, going back to the war, as General Lee is attempting to escape Grant, him and his troops get surrounded. And they don't want to fight anymore. Just kind of plain and simple, they don't want to be involved in this bloody war. So while they're surrounded, they're cut off, they're most likely going to be put under siege. General Grant, he tries to get them to surrender. And eventually Lee and the Confederates agreed that they need to surrender. The war is officially going to be over. Now, before Grant was willing to accept their surrender, he wanted a term, and he wanted to make sure that any of the Confederate soldiers, they would not be tried for treason, which is kind of a big deal, because here you have people from the United States that were actively trying to, I guess you could say, overthrow the U.S. government. But General Grant agrees to it. And they look at that as kind of like forgiving the South and taking a step forward. General Grant even took it a step further by saying that all the soldiers, all the Confederate soldiers, they could leave and they could take their horses. And they could do that to make it through the next winter. So again, that kind of compassion and showing of good faith is going to go a long way. But General Grant, he accepts their surrender. He guarantees that they would not be tried for treason. Now, that's the soldiers. The generals are going to be a little bit different and lets them go and take their horses. So now, officially, the Union, they have won the war. And the last one, Lincoln's assassination. After the war, President Lincoln makes a speech outlining his plan for the United States. That's going to be known as Reconstruction, and that's mostly what the next section is going to be about. How should this whole country, how should it come together? Should the South or should the Confederate be blamed for the war? Should there be harsh penalties? We're going to talk about what the different beliefs and different policies and what actually goes into effect there. But Lincoln makes his speech outlining his plan for the United States, and while he's making this speech, John Wilkes Booth, who we know today as the individual who is going to assassinate Lincoln, kind of sneers and jokes to a friend and says, this is the last speech he will ever give. Now, Abraham Lincoln, there were a lot of assassination threats that were towards him. So he was told by his security, do not go out in public. Do not go unescorted out in public. But Lincoln, he's not afraid. Lincoln thinks that he needs to show his power and his might. And he is going to go to a play at Ford's Theater. So during the play, John Wilkes Booth sneaks up, goes behind Abraham Lincoln, shoots him in the back of the head, jumps on stage, and runs away. Now, at this time, it wasn't uncommon for John Wilkes Booth to be there. He's one of the most famous actors of the time period. So as far as him being at Ford's Theater, it's not really looked at as like, what is he doing here? And even again, some people thought it was just part of the play. Here's the most famous person. We hear a noise, and he jumps onto the stage and runs away. But the next morning, Abraham Lincoln is officially considered dead. Vice President Andrew Johnson is going to take over as the president, which is going to cause some difficulties ahead. Lincoln was a great leader. Andrew Johnson, he had some good ideas, but it was tough for him to get support. So on that note, we will end it and start next time by talking about Reconstruction.